Hello, hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Let's wait a few seconds and see if more of the attendees will join. Okay, I see people joining from different corners of the world, so it's going to be very different time frames. Sorry, time zones for everyone here. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos, and as you know, today we are going to go with our Surrogacy in Mexico 101, let's say, and the reasons why intended parents would choose Mexico over other countries. And before that, I want to thank my colleague Eduardo, who is in the background here, helping me with all the IT stuff. That's not my forte, so he'll be helping here. Thank you, Eduardo. And quick reminder that everyone will be able to have their questions answered at the end of the webinar. And we'll do it live. So we'll answer your questions live. I'm going to start presenting a few slides that I have prepared for you, and just jot down those questions, and then afterwards we can answer them. Okay? Let's get started with the presentation. And here we are. Well, once again, thank you, everyone. 101 on choosing surrogacy internationally and why Mexico. Okay. And you might be wondering who I am. And if not, I'll tell you anyway. My name is Carlos. I am from Spain. I live in Mexico now. I moved to Mexico 6 years ago now, right when COVID hit. And as you can see here, there's two pictures of me, one with Miracle and the other one with my two little rascals. They are now 2 years, and they were born through surrogacy in 2024. And we are now starting our second journey, hoping to get a girl. So who knows, right? And also, I've been with Miracle for over 5 years now, so probably I'll be able to answer most of your questions. And if not, if I don't have the answer, feel free to email me. All of you should have an email from me with these webinar details, and you can ask those questions there. And if you are not in contact with Miracle, you can also email me, and I'll get you in contact with one of our coordinators. If you already are, just address those questions to any of our coordinators, whoever he or she is. Okay? Let's move forward with a little disclaimer here. Any information given in this or any of the webinars, please don't take it for granted, because things might differ and it could be just a few days apart from what I'm telling you and any changes that might come. So this webinar does not substitute legal advice or immigration professionals or medical advice. Please don't ever take my word for granted. Do always consult with the professionals on each field. Remember that this webinar is going to be based on the overall process in Mexico and why we should choose Mexico. We'll start with why people are considering surrogacy internationally, why Mexico would be a popular destination for many. Then we'll go through how a typical surrogacy program looks like in Mexico. Then what should be our steps to choose our agency, our professionals who will be working with in Mexico. Then questions that you should be asking your agencies to make sure that you are choosing the right one. And then a few common misconceptions that most intended parents have at some point during their journeys. Now, what is gestational surrogacy? Well, basically, it's a process in which we have a woman carrying a baby for somebody else. That woman will never have a genetic connection with the baby. The baby is always for the intended parents. And that pregnancy occurs after embryos are implanted, embryos or embryo, depending on which option we take, either single embryo transfer or double embryo transfer. And those embryos have been created with either sperm donor and egg donor or both, or we are using the genetic material of the intended parents. And ultimately, the gestational carrier or the surrogate is only responsible for taking care of that pregnancy until the very end, and she will never have a genetic connection with the baby. Moving on to who might be wanting to pursue surrogacy. I think the question for all of us, the answer is pretty clear, but anyone who wants to have a family and doesn't have those means to do it in their country, or maybe it's because they are a same-sex couple and they cannot conceive without the assistance of a third party and through IVF, then single men, single women, then also very important, a sector of this population that cannot conceive or has had repeated pregnancy losses, and also individuals that carry specific conditions that makes it impossible for them to carry. Something very important, and I'll repeat this sentence throughout the webinar: there is no single path to parenthood which is going to be equal to another. There's always differences. Therefore, if you have friends that have done surrogacy, whether in Mexico or in a different country, don't expect your journey to be the exact same journey, because there's never the same conditions, never the same egg donor, never the same sperm, never the same surrogate. And as we always say at Miracle, babies are unpredictable, so every pregnancy will be very different. Moving on to why look beyond your home country. As an immigrant myself, coming from Spain to Mexico, I do miss my country. However, I already know that Spain does not allow surrogacy. That might be your situation, it might be not. But what's true is that for some reasons, we are seeking surrogacy, or we have sought surrogacy away from home. Now, the most common reasons for seeking surrogacy internationally are listed here. The first one being the long waiting lists for surrogates to be matched with intended parents. It is not news in the surrogacy industry that, for example, in the US or Canada, it could take many months, even more than a year or even 2 years, to have a surrogate matched with you. And for some intended parents, that is not an option. They want to expedite the process, or simply they cannot wait, and they choose to go to another country because the waiting times are going to be less than in their home countries. Another common reason for those to seek surrogacy internationally could be legal restrictions that exclude certain family structures. In this case, we're talking about monoparental families or same-sex couples that, for whatever legal restrictions that they might have in their countries, it's not allowed for them to have babies, and they have to seek international surrogacy. A third common reason for those to seek international surrogacy is the cost of the process itself. In Mexico, compared to other countries, the cost of surrogacy is much lower. Compared to, for example, what we know from the US, it could be a third of what some agencies would charge in the US. In some cases, it might be half of what you would pay in the US, but definitely it's a lot less than the US. But we also know that Mexico might have higher costs compared to other countries, namely Georgia in Europe, or other countries that also offer surrogacy. However, restrictions do apply in many of those other countries. Then third and fourth point here go very together, and this is limited access for LGBTQ plus individuals or single parents. There are certain countries that do not allow gay marriage, and even less families or adopting or having children through surrogacy in those countries. And one last reason could be, for example, the need for egg donation or even sperm donation, and those services not being available in their home country. For many of those that seek surrogacy, and are not doing what is called a cell cycle, there is a need for, in most cases, an egg donor. In some cases, also it could be a need for a sperm donor. Thankfully, Mexico does allow both of these options. Therefore, Mexico will always be a good choice for these that do not have those services available in their countries. Once again, every family has different priorities, every journey is different, and it's perfectly okay not to fit that bill that works for everybody, because we all are different and every journey will always be different. Let's move on to the next slide here, guys. And we're talking about international destinations. Which destinations are going to be considered by intended parents? Now, rather than focusing on Mexico itself, let's go through a list of reasons why intended parents might lean towards one country or the other. One of the most important reasons is the legal framework and the protections that the country that you're looking for offers, right? There might be countries where not adopting. I meant having children for a gay couple is not allowed. Therefore, that country will never issue a birth certificate with two men in it. Also, there's countries where only the surrogate will be listed as the mother, not the parents. That's something very important to consider. And it's not a topic that should be taken lightly. You should consult with a law firm. You should consult with immigration officers at your home country, and also, if possible, with a law firm in the country that you are choosing for surrogacy, because there might be information that you are not aware of 100%. And ultimately, to seek that advice, ask your coordinators and your agencies to provide that information. They should have it available. Now, medical expertise and clinic standards. We have often heard the words first world, second world, third world. And we all always have these standards of the first world, right? Therefore, we also know that in many countries, the care that is provided to surrogates or even the services that are offered when it comes to IVF are not at the same level of those first world countries. Therefore, that's also a reason for many to choose countries that will offer those services at the level that they expect. Next, we have accessibility and travel logistics. It might not be the same, for example, for someone that lives in Canada compared to someone that lives in Australia. It sounds silly, but someone that lives in Canada might have a preference to do the surrogacy journey in the US, Mexico, other countries in America as a continent. But someone that lives in Australia might have a preference to do that journey somewhere else closer to where they live. And that makes perfect sense. But just let's be aware that that option that seems to be the most appropriate might not be the one that works for you. Then the overall costs. We know already that surrogacy is not expensive. I mean, it's not cheap. On the contrary, it's very expensive. But if we can save some dollars doing it internationally, why not, right? And also, different countries have different costs for the surrogacy programs. We always have to seek that one that offers the program at a cost that we can afford, but always bearing in mind that the cost will not define the service. You might be paying a lot and receiving very poor service. You might be paying less and receiving extraordinary care and service. As we mentioned before, the waiting times is also a very good reason for seeking international surrogacy. It's not new. We know it, and it's happened for many years, and it's going to continue to happen. In some cases, it takes many months, if not years, to have a surrogate matched with you, with your journey. And that, as again, for many intended parents, is not an option. And that also ties in with the next point in this slide, which is the availability of surrogates. Depending on the screening process and the type of surrogates that each country will offer, the availability will be more or less limited. I can only talk about Mexico at this very particular point. And from a perspective of someone that comes from Europe, myself, I was always thinking that a surrogate might be a normal person that does this wonderful gesture towards someone that they don't even know. That doesn't change regardless of the country. However, what does change is what we expect from a surrogate, or where she's going to live and who is she going to live with. And I'm referring to, for example, if we are doing surrogacy in the US, we might expect a surrogate to live in a very nice house with her children and husband. That might be different in other countries, specifically in Mexico. What I will say is that Mexico has a very specific way of living and a very specific behavior socially, culturally, and family-wise, meaning that we shouldn't expect the same from a surrogate in the US or in Canada or in Australia or in Georgia compared to one in Mexico. Why is that? Of course, I'm leaving aside all of the care for the surrogate, the screening and all of that, because that should always be the same and should be very thorough. But we should expect our surrogate to follow, for example, the way things are done in Mexico. A very curious case, if we are doing surrogacy in Mexico, we will never offer, because it's not available, a surrogate who is Asian, right? We don't have Asian surrogates in Mexico. And that, I think, depicts very well what I mean when it comes to availability of surrogates. Don't forget to write down those questions so you can have them answered at the very end. And let's move on to the next slide. And I'm talking about the factors that might attract intended parents to specifically Mexico. It's not news to anyone here that Mexico is very well known for many things other than tacos, of course. One of them would be, for example, medical tourism, surrogacy being part of that very big field of medical tourism. And there is a reason for that. The level of services and clinics that is offered in Mexico is extremely high. And in many cases, we have heard from intended parents that the level of service that they have received is even higher than what they would have expected at their clinics in their countries. I think that speaks volumes of how most clinics, well-established clinics in Mexico, operate with professional care and established protocols that are followed internationally. Then, accessibility. Mexico is very well known for surrogacy, and it's accessible to practically anyone. Why is that? Because Mexico and its legislation, the Constitution of Mexico actually, includes a section that defends the right of anyone of procreating, of having a family. It's called the procreational will. Therefore, because of the law in Mexico, IVF and surrogacy is 100% legal and accessible to those that want to come here and do surrogacy with a Mexican agency. Once again, the same topic, availability of gestational carriers and egg donors. I can't speak for other agencies, but I do speak for Miracle here. Miracle has dozens of surrogates screened on a weekly basis, and we have surrogates available, and our timing for a surrogate match doesn't go beyond 10 weeks. Therefore, we are sort of beating all of the records there. And also for egg donors, Miracle Surrogacy has a cadre of around 200 and 150 egg donors available, whether it's through frozen egg bank or through live retrieval. And in general, in Mexico, that is what happens. Surrogates and egg donors are available. It might differ in terms of how long it will take for a surrogate to be available or not. But for donors, it will also depend on whether you choose frozen eggs or live retrieval. Why would someone choose frozen eggs? Mostly because it's quicker to begin with the journey. The eggs are already frozen, you don't have to wait. And why would someone go with fresh eggs? Basically because they fall in love with that egg donor and they have to wait maybe 2 months, 1 month, 1 week. It always depends on the actual menstrual cycle of the egg donor. But that is the topic that we will deal with on a different webinar. Now, the next point here would be competitive overall costs. As we mentioned earlier in this webinar, costs in other countries might go beyond $200,000. That's a lot of money. And thankfully, Mexico is able to offer less expensive programs. On average, around $60,000 to $70,000. That should be expected from a Mexican program. However, it will depend on the program type, on the needs of that specific program, also on the agency, of course, and in many cases also depending on which egg donor you have chosen, because there might be differences in cost depending on the origin or the availability of egg donors. Once again, shorter waiting times specifically for surrogates. As I mentioned before, and I can only speak for Miracle here, waiting times with Miracle don't exceed ever the 8 to 10 weeks deadline. And in fact, if we ever go beyond 12 weeks, we always give a 2-week margin because of the preparation of the endometrium of the surrogate. That could be different from one surrogate to another. If we go beyond, by contract, we will compensate the intended parents. And last but not least, support for diverse family structures. Why this is important? Because again, not all of the countries do allow people from the LGBTQ community, for example, to have a family. And therefore, they have to turn to, in this case, Mexico. Moving on to the next slide. And this is a question that you might have asked yourselves. Is really Mexico the right choice for me, for my case, for my journey? It is extremely important that you understand what the Mexican process looks like, but also even more important, what the process will look like once you are back home with your baby. Technically speaking, anyone could have a baby in Mexico, but returning to the country and doing the paperwork and following the legislation of that specific country could be the actual challenge. Why do I say this? I'll give you my own example. Surrogacy is not permitted in Spain. However, as a Spaniard myself, I can do surrogacy in Mexico, do a legal process in Mexico, and then when I go back to Spain, I have to demonstrate in front of a court that that child is mine. So, can I do surrogacy in Mexico? The answer is yes, but I always have to consider what the process looks like in Spain if I ever go back there to live there. The same could happen with other countries. For instance, we know that in New Zealand, New Zealanders have to adopt the baby once they set foot in their homeland, regardless of the names that appear on the Mexican birth certificate. So again, every country will have different frameworks, and origin and residence should be considered, both, like where you are doing surrogacy, but also where you're planning to go back after your baby is born. Budget and financial planning. Again, not new, that surrogacy might be very expensive. Mexico is less expensive, but let's be honest. I chose Mexico because I lived here with my partner, but we had considered doing surrogacy before in San Diego. It turned out to be a big no for us because we had to pay 3 times what we paid in Mexico. And by the way, my babies were born in Mexico through Miracle Surrogacy. And we had to have a budget, and we shouldn't go beyond that because that meant that we would have problems. I strongly advise to have a budget that gives you a little bit of wiggle room just in case things don't work out the way you expect them to. And I mean with this that not all of the journeys have again, none of them are the same, but none of the journeys have the exact same amount of embryo implantations or IVF cycles. My own cycle, my own journey, we took 2 IVF cycles and 2 embryo implantations. For us, it worked with the second cycle and the second embryo implantation. For many others, it does work with 1 cycle of IVF and 1 embryo implantation. And for many others, that they need maybe 2, 3, 4 attempts. What is going to define the number of attempts that you will need? The actual quality of the embryos, the results of embryo implantation, and those results could have an impact on your budget. Meaning that if you have planned for a surrogacy journey with only 1 embryo transfer included, it might be a very good idea to have wiggle room just in case you need maybe 1 or 2 extra embryo implantations. Also consider that the programs that you might be signing for with your surrogacy agencies might already include more than 1 embryo implantation. Just make sure you ask your agency if that is the case. If not, most likely it'll be like a pay-as-you-go program. But unless there is a already known condition that prevents the intended parent from getting pregnant because of sperm quality, or who knows at that point what could be, with Miracle, the success rate says that most intended parents get pregnant within the first, second, or third embryo implantation. And just a quick note here, on your contracts with Miracle, you will see that if you need more than 3 embryo implantations and you still have embryos that meet the requirements, any embryo implantations beyond the third one will be taken care of financially by Miracle. That's also very important to consider, whether your agency is giving you or not any extra embryo transfers or anything else that you might, that might help you consider whether that agency in Mexico is or not your chosen one. Travel requirements and logistics. Why is that important? Well, it's not the same if you're flying from India compared to flying from the US. You might or might not have a visa for you, for yourself, for the baby when you return back home. All of that might also impact your decision-making process. Mexico, thankfully, is welcoming when it comes to visas and accepting tourists from all over the world. And in any case, for most countries, the time that you will spend in Mexico, allowed by your visa, will never exceed the maximum, meaning that I believe it's 180 days that you can stay in Mexico without having to renew your visa. And the expected time for anyone that does surrogacy in Mexico with Miracle, it should not be more than 6 to 7 weeks. It depends on the exact country where you're returning to and the exact legal procedures, and of course, the exact timing that your embassy or consulate requires for the issuance of passports, travel permits, and any other documentation that might be needed. As I was telling you guys before, the legal process in your home country will also define most likely whether Mexico is or not a good option for you. There's some countries that do not accept, for example, as I mentioned before, birth certificates with 2 men on it, and that's fine. But that might be a reason for you not to choose Mexico if you are a gay couple, right? Or there might be countries that would never accept a surrogate's name on the birth certificate if the woman that is claiming that baby is from a very specific country, meaning that they will never allow that mother to be the mother, legally speaking, of the child. And in any cases, it could be done through adoption. But again, that's to be answered by a law firm or a legal advisor in your home country. The medical history and embryo availability. If you already know what your situation is in regards to your pregnancies, if you are a straight couple, you already know most likely the reasons why you don't get pregnant. And that is also very important because some countries might not accept certain and specific journeys if they know that there's already a record of pregnancy losses or anything that could prevent that couple from getting pregnant. Mexico is, again, very welcoming in many aspects, this one being one of them. Typically, there is no limitations when it comes to surrogacy, not even age. We know that some countries do have restrictive numbers when it comes to age of intended parents. Mexico is not one of them. And all of you guys, regardless of your age, should be welcome to do surrogacy in Mexico. And last here would be personal preferences. If you don't like Mexico, don't even look for surrogacy in Mexico, although it might be cheaper than other options you are considering. But I mean, this is sort of like a joke. If you don't like Mexico, of course, you're not going to search for surrogates in Mexico. But someone, for example, from Spain might have made up his mind or her mind and is thinking of doing surrogacy in Greece just because it's closer to where they live, or in Georgia, or in Ukraine. Well, right now it's not the best destination, right? But that is also something very important. Also, in some cases, we have seen couples that have chosen Mexico because, oh, I have a sister living in Mexico. That is not the best reason to choose a country, right? But if that is going to help the intended parent to have a smoother exit process because he or she will have someone supporting them, why not? So your personal preferences also play a role in your choosing, in your decision-making process. And here in bold, you will see that there is no universally best country. The right choice depends on you and your specific needs for your surrogacy journey. I'm sure this slide will have many questions, but let's move on. The typical surrogacy process. Again, this is Surrogacy 101. We're not going to go through all of these points in detail, but you should have at least consultations in plural with your agency to receive all of the explanations that you need of the process. Ask as many questions as you have. No questions should be left unanswered. And something that I always said to myself, oh, I'm not going to ask this because it's a silly question. No, there is no silly questions. All questions should be answered. And if the agency is not answering your questions, then think it twice. Medical review. Make sure that the agency you're considering is able to provide the medical information of all of the processes that you will undergo as an intended parent, and also what the journey will look like for the surrogate, because also that's a medical journey for her, and the agency should be able to provide that information too. Embryo creation or shipment. Either you ship your embryos from your country because you already created them, or you create them in Mexico. That is also part of the process. And that, in a way, it's also going to determine whether your journey will be longer or shorter. If you're shipping the embryos, it should be much faster. And in most cases, those that have shipped embryos to Miracle, they have been back home before the first 12 months. 10, 11 months, 12 months should be more than enough. If you are considering the embryo creation process in Mexico, then that could perfectly add 2, 3, 4, 5 months to the process, depending on the availability of that specific egg donor that you have chosen. And also depending on, for example, if you are doing genetic testing, that might postpone a little bit the embryo transfer because of the results having to be received from the genetic lab. The matching process, I mentioned it before, it should be very quick, at least with Miracle, but that's a part of the process that you have to have very clear before you sign up. You should ask your agency how long it will take for a surrogate to be assigned and how long it will take for the embryo implantation to happen after that surrogate is assigned to your journey. Legal preparation. You should not ever sign up with an agency that is not able to provide information on how the legal process will look like before, during, and after your surrogacy journey. Again, I'm talking about Mexico specifically, and it's always, I strongly advise to check also with a legal representative from your country of origin that will give you the other side of the coin, the side of the country you're planning to return to. Another moment of each journey would be the embryo transfer. That is a must, right, if you want to get pregnant. The embryo transfer should be easy, no complications, and medical reports of each procedure should be provided to you as intended parents, containing information of the surrogate, the procedure, the doctors, and the embryos that were implanted. After the embryo implantation or embryo transfer, if that has been successful, and typically pregnancies through surrogacy are not confirmed until we have a confirmed heartbeat, right after that follows the pregnancy care, which will differ from one agency to the other, but should include ultrasounds, genetic tests, also structural ultrasounds that will specifically deal with specific points of the genetic makeup of the embryo or structural problems such as malformations. That pregnancy care should last the whole pregnancy, not just a few appointments. And typically, it should also include blood work, psychological sessions for the surrogate, and also blood works to make sure that everything is in order throughout your pregnancy. The pregnancy care should also include, in most cases, contact with the intended parent and the surrogate. Typically, that happens sort of on demand, but most agencies will have a standard procedure when it comes to contact of the intended parent with the surrogate. Ask your specific agency what they are offering, and in most cases, they would tailor that communication with the surrogate to the specific intended parent to make sure that the service that they are offering is what the intended parents expect. Then the birth, that's the moment we all expect. You should be informed of the expected delivery dates, which in order for them to be scheduled and programmed for you to know when the baby is going to be born, most likely it will be through C-sections. That's the only way that doctors can program the actual C-section, and we as an agency can tell you your baby will be born on December 25th, right? What a day I chose. That helps you guys with the planning, but also helps us making sure that we have a deadline in which you have to have already everything prepared and ready for the next step, which would be the exit process and returning home with your baby. That process is daunting, it is, we know, but the agency you choose should have the means to assist you throughout the whole process. You should not be left alone to deal with all of that. It's a lot, and you should seek always an agency that is offering the expertise that they have during the exit process. As I mentioned at some point before, with Miracle and the way we work with the law firms, any intended parent doing surrogacy in Mexico should not stay anything beyond 6, maximum 7 weeks. We already have the timeframes for many things, but also it's very important to consider that there is a point in which Miracle or the intended parent lose control of the timeframes. And I'm referring to the embassy appointment. Sometimes they have availability for appointments in 2 days, and then in some other cases you have to wait 2-3 weeks until you have an appointment available. But again, your agency should be able to guide you and hold your hand throughout the whole process. Moving on, who may be involved, guys, in your surrogacy journey? Aside from you as intended parents, right, and the agency, we should have the fertility clinic staff that will take care of your embryo creation or embryo storage. Then you should also have the coordinators of your surrogacy agency. That's very important. You should have a coordinator almost 24/7 in a way that will be able to provide information when needed, always considering that there might be a delay in those appointments happening and then the agency receiving the information and the coordinator sending it back to you. The embryology laboratory, they should always be involved, because if you're not creating embryos, that's not a problem. But if you're not creating them with an agency in Mexico, the embryology lab is the one that is going to thaw that embryo and make sure it's ready for implantation. So they will also be involved. Then there's the legal professionals. Most agencies, like in Miracle, we have our legal advisors within Miracle that will guide every single parent through the steps that are needed for the exit process to succeed. In due time, you'll receive information of what you need to prepare, when you need to have it, and when you need to contact the legal firm to actually engage in the legal process itself. Then, in most cases, most agencies offer mental health professionals that are available to the surrogates. Not to mention that, like in Miracle, surrogates should be screened from the very beginning also at a psychological level. That's very important. And that's why we do it in Mexico, with Miracle, because we cannot have surrogates going crazy, right? Now, your journey coordination should be your point of contact from the moment you sign up until you are already home with your baby. And you should have someone available, always. And lastly, the shipping companies, for those that have already embryos elsewhere, should also be involved in your surrogacy journeys. And as I mentioned before, every journey is different, and the teams that will be involved in your journey might differ just because of that. No pregnancy is the same. Questions to ask to your agency, to any provider you talk to. It's very important to understand that experience matters. Why is that? It's not the same for someone that has been doing surrogacy for 1 year to offer a service compared to someone that has been doing surrogacy for 12 years. The experience of both agencies does exist, but at different levels. Therefore, you might consider an agency who is more experienced, and you should be able to ask that question and receive an answer from your agency. Second question you should always ask is which medical providers are involved in the process. Almost every agency in Mexico is tied to a clinic or is partnered with a clinic, and they should be willing to disclose the information of which clinic they are operating with. It should be no secret. With Miracle is not. We have different partners in Mexico City, in Merida, and Cancun, and we are happy to disclose that information when the intended parent asks. The surrogate screening process should also be available to you guys, because the way a surrogate is screened might actually define whether you sign up or not with an agency. And the surrogate screening should go through different levels. I'm talking legal, medical, psychological, and sociocultural. All of that should be involved in that screening. Your agency should also clearly and in bold and in capitals tell you which of the services that you expect are included or not. The contract should say what's included and what's not. Why? To avoid surprises, to avoid hidden fees that agencies are not telling you. So you might even want to ask for a template of the contract. On top of that, what if the first embryo implantation is not successful? Picking up where I left it, I mentioned before that some agencies do have programs with many attempts included, and some others don't have as many attempts included. Make sure your agency is telling you that information. Then, how are unexpected situations handled? Mexico does not offer surrogacy insurance. Therefore, it's important for intended parents to understand how these emergency situations could be handled. And typically, it's through an escrow account. Intended parents should give the company or the agency a certain amount of money that should be used to cover those unexpected situations. Communication. As I said before, you should have a designated coordinator that will be answering all of your questions. Typically, and for record keeping, communication is preferred by email, but some agencies like Miracle, we will also offer the option of communicating through WhatsApp or text messages, or even that's something we actually suggest, having video calls with your coordinator. That helps a lot to break that barrier of communication. And what support is available after birth? Even though agencies per se do not offer those services, or most agencies, your agency should be able to tell you what are the typical services that intended parents need. And I'm talking about coordination of appointments with pediatricians, nanny services, anything that you might need after the baby is born. Miracle has a concierge team and the clinical services team that will be available when the time comes after birth for the intended parents to actually solve all of those questions and situations that they might encounter after the birth of their baby. Let's move forward. Red flags. Any agency should be tagged with a red flag if they are making promises of things that cannot be promised. For example, no agency or IVF expert in the world will guarantee ever a live birth or a successful pregnancy. Why? Because it's impossible to control every single aspect. And if they do, please read the fine print. No one should sign up with an agency that is pressuring intended parents to sign a contract. That's not the way it works. Surrogacy is it's got to need a very thorough process of investigation and making sure that it's the right agency. Lack of transparency. All processes should be disclosed to you, the way they happen, when they happen, and how they happen. So if they are not disclosing that, please put a red flag in there. Hidden or unclear pricing. Everything that or any cost that you might have to incur should be listed in the contract where possible. As we said before, there might be unexpected situations or emergency situations in which there might be a need for a procedure that cannot be listed in the contract because we will have a never-ending 1,000 pages contract. Then if an agency is not able to answer questions that you think should be simple, or they take too much time, please also place a red flag. Lastly, we have two more points here. Independent legal advice should be always the option to seek legal advice, and the agency should be able to indicate with whom they work with. And not only for you as intended parents, but also independent legal guidance should be offered to the surrogates like Miracle does. And you should not ever sign with an agency that does not offer everything they say in written in their contracts. You don't have to rush because information for you guys is power. Some myths and facts. This is where it gets funny. International surrogacy is the same everywhere. That's a complete lie. Surrogacy is not the same in Mexico compared to the US, compared to Georgia, compared to Canada, compared to Australia. No country does things the same. That's 100% guaranteed. The cheapest option is always the best. Wrong. We know that sometimes cheap is not good. Therefore, maybe the cheapest option when it comes to surrogacy is not the best choice because there might be things that they are not actually including in the costs. And then you'll have hidden fees. Success rates tell the whole story. Yes, but no. Many factors are involved in the process, and these success rates will differ from month to month, from year to year. Why? Because every pregnancy is different. Every agency must have protocols that will be followed for every single pregnancy. But what happens even after those protocols are applied? No one can actually see the future. I wish we could. Otherwise, it would be just crazy. And last year, I only need to travel once. Also wrong. It might be the case if you're shipping embryos that you have to come to Mexico only once to pick up your baby. But for those that are not shipping but creating embryos in Mexico, that means that you'll have to come for the first appointment with the semen deposits and at least another time towards the end of the process to pick up your baby. In between, we strongly advise always to come to Mexico to meet your surrogate in person. If, of course, it's possible because someone lives in Australia, that makes it very difficult, right? Compared to someone that lives in Florida. But if possible, we would always recommend coming down to Mexico. In my own journey, I met my surrogate 3 times for the pregnancy. But again, every journey is different and don't expect yours to be just as your neighbor that also did surrogacy. We're reaching the end, and this is the short list of takeaways that you should leave this webinar with. International surrogacy is a very complex but well-established family building option. Be informed before you sign any contract. Then, Mexico is one of several destinations that intended parents may consider. So don't get stuck with only Mexico. There are many countries that do surrogacy, but if you choose Mexico, make sure you choose Miracle. Every family's priorities and circumstances are different. That's the truth. What works for me will not work for my colleagues or for you. Therefore, you have to consider your own journey and your own agency. Choosing experienced professionals and asking informed questions matters a lot, as much as comparing prices. Price is very important because not everybody has the same budget, but also the information you receive is equally important. And last, understanding the process before deciding will make the difference because you'll have a more calm journey, at least in your mind, I'm referring to, because you'll understand what's happening at every stage of your journey. And if you still have doubts, please always ask. And now is the time, after almost 50 minutes of my talking, for you to pose your questions. and for us to answer them. Thank you. Now, let me see. Eduardo, if you're here and you listen to me, tell me if you see the questions because I'm having trouble here. Questions and answers. Perfect. I see them here.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the question. I'll read the question first and then answer. The first question is, are there any financial, God, English is not my first language, sorry, financing options? The answer is that some agencies might have financial institutions that they are working with. It's not the case of Miracle. However, Miracle offers a structured program with 5 different stages of payments. Each one of those stages goes with each one of the biggest milestones in the journey: embryo creation, embryo transfer, heartbeat, week 16, and week 24. Those 5 stages, and the whole amount of the program is not paid up front. That was the first 2 questions. They are the same question. And I have another one, a long one. I'm going to read it for you guys. Would it be possible to arrange future meetings with egg donors from your website so that the children conceived through their donation have the opportunity to meet and build connection with her, if everyone is comfortable with that? With Miracle, and thank you for the question, that is not possible. All of our egg donors are anonymous. However, all of them are screened. Therefore, just because they are anonymous, we cannot disclose contact information, as that would be a violation of the contract that they signed with Miracle. Let me see. We have another question here. You mentioned transferring more than one embryo within one transfer. Can you explain? Of course, yeah, I can expand on that. Typically, most professionals in the IVF field would advise implanting one single embryo as long as that embryo is morphologically viable and has been genetically tested, and the result of that genetic testing is normal or euploid. Implanting one embryo means that most likely you will have one baby if that embryo does take, with a 1-2% chances of that single embryo splitting and becoming identical twins. Now, double embryo implantations are available, but they come with a risk. And that risk is twin pregnancies like mine are high-risk pregnancies, meaning that there could be potentially more problems throughout the pregnancy and towards the end, primarily because of the bigger belly and the more weight that the surrogate carries. And prematurely born babies could also need NICU. But in any case, if you ask for a double embryo implantation, most agencies, I know Miracle, we do accept those double embryo implantations. We would ask of an intended parent to sign a consent in which he or she, they understand the risks that come with a double embryo implantation. Now we also have another question here saying, can we choose the quality/experience of a surrogate? This will also be dealt with in a different webinar, but all of the surrogates that are accepted to become surrogates with Miracle, all of them are experienced. Now, I'll define what that means. Experience in being pregnant and having their own children, yes, because all of the surrogates that we have in our cadre of surrogates have been approved because they have passed the screenings, and one of those things that they screened, checked, double-checked, is that they must have their own children. Now, if you're referring to an experienced surrogate or a returning surrogate that wants to do a second journey, surrogates like this type sometimes are available, but not always. If they are available and you ask for one that's experienced, with Miracle, we are happy to match her with you, but that might also mean that you have to wait a bit longer just because she's not ready yet for the implantation, right? But it should not be a factor that rules out a surrogate or not, because all of them, regardless of the fact that they might have been surrogates before, is screened with the exact same protocols and approved by doctors. We have another question saying, if I'm coming to Mexico for semen deposits, How long do I need to be there? Thank you for the question. Each agency will have different protocols, but most of the cases require two semen deposits, separated with 1 day in between, meaning that if you come, for example, on Sunday, you'll have your first semen deposit on Monday. Tuesday is a rest day, and you'll come back for the second semen deposit on Wednesday. After that, you're free to go. The reason why most agencies would have intended parents provide two semen deposits is because we might have to do a second IVF cycle as intended parents, and that will save you a lot of money of having to come back to Mexico to provide that sperm. And typically, for each sperm donation, it will depend. It's not always exact, but typically there's 1 or 2 vials obtained per semen deposit, and typically there is 1 semen vial used per IVF cycle, meaning that if you come twice, you go 2 days for the semen deposits, and you have 4 semen vials, you might have enough to go through 4 different IVF rounds. God forbid you need them, right? Now, another question here. Is the cost of a double journey double the cost? Technically speaking, yes. It's 2 different journeys because you need 2 different surrogates. And the cost that you have to pay double is the part of the journey that you are using. I'll explain, I'll elaborate. If you create embryos with us or with an agency in Mexico, you need to create them and then do the surrogacy part. If you have embryos from that first journey and you are already pregnant, for that second journey, you don't have to pay the full cost of the embryo creation, but only the cost of the surrogacy part. In the case of Miracle, it is lower than the total cost of an egg donor program, but in theory, yes, it's twice the cost because it's two journeys, with each one with 1 surrogate. And that was the last question that I have here. Please feel free to type your last questions. We have still a few minutes left, and we have here another question. Between frozen eggs and retrieval required, which one do you prefer and why? Okay, I'm not part of Miracle anymore. I'll tell you my opinion. The ones that worked for my cycle, my second cycle, were the frozen ones. My first cycle was with fresh eggs. My second cycle was with frozen eggs. But thankfully, and due to the experienced professionals that work in our partner clinics, and also because of the vitrification methods, the freezing methods, the difference between frozen and fresh eggs is minimum, and most of the times has to do with the quality of the sperm that is being used to fertilize those eggs, rather than the fact that they might be frozen or not. Something I would consider is that frozen eggs have to be thawed, and during that thawing process, they might suffer, or some of them might even come to a development arrest. They might die, meaning that if you have bought 20 frozen eggs, you might end up with 19 or 18. That dying of the eggs, dying or degrading is actually normal, and it's part of the process, and it's one of the risks of frozen eggs. Whereas with fresh eggs, they have not been frozen, they don't have to be thawed. That risk doesn't exist. However, if you are going for fresh eggs, you must have in mind that the egg donor might be able to provide 20 follicles with 20 eggs, but only 17 of them, and I'm making up these numbers, are mature. Therefore, you are losing 3 eggs. Oh my God, 3 eggs. There's pros and cons with frozen and also with fresh. My advice to anyone deciding whether choosing frozen or fresh, choose the egg donor that you really fall in love with, because that lady is 50% of your baby. And that was the last question. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions? There is none. We have still 1 minute left, and I would like to thank everyone that joined. This has been Surrogacy 101 for the process in Mexico. The next one will be held in a couple of weeks on July 31st, I believe, and we'll be dealing with a more in-depth part of the process, which is the actual process of a surrogacy journey. one of the slides that we reviewed today, will be the whole webinar in 2 weeks. It's going to be from consultation to bringing your baby home. So if you have some doubts, you might have them answered in that webinar. And if not, I'm sure that you will find another 4 webinars, and at least one of them or 2 will be interesting for you. Thank you very much, everyone. And if you have questions, please send them over just by replying to that email that I sent before. And hopefully, very soon you'll have a baby in your arms. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.